You know we love to talk about the draft here on Locked On Guardians. We know that our everydayers and our diehards love to hear us talk draft. We're coming at you with a different type of draft talk today. It's the top 10 biggest busts in Cleveland baseball draft history. Buckle up, get ready to hear some names you've never heard of before, and probably do a lot of groaning along the way.
Tanner Bagger, the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, sorry, Tanner, you're number one on my list. Biggest bust, and I'm kidding, obviously. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 and bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
That's the top 10 biggest busts in Cleveland baseball draft history. We're going to talk dishonorable mentions, top 10, look at some of the worst years. We'll look at some of the worst money spent. A lot of weird stuff here. You would think that Cleveland, a team that really has to make its, has to butter its bread with the draft. Some pretty bad decisions made over the last 20 years. So just for reference, we're going back to 2000 all the way. I have up to 2020 because I don't think it's fair to say a whole lot about 2021. And truthfully, it probably shouldn't be fair to even judge 2020. But 2020, there is such bad things going from that draft that I think it's fair to include at this point.
I mean, I've got a dishonorable mention from that class.
I have one in my top 10 in that class. So that's an easy one to figure out. So we'll get into that. And then just up front, too, we're going to, there was a lot of news on the Guardians front, at least from roster moves and surgeries on Tuesday. We're going to also put out a quick bonus episode. I don't know how long it'll be, but we will do a little bonus.
A lot of it we had discussed
on all that
yesterday.
Yeah.
A lot of it was, yesterday we kind of.
It'll just be an update on David Fry, basically.
Yeah, there's a little more information, but we more or less kind of predicted everything that went down today. So
we did. All right, so let's start with this. By the way, I'm Justin Ladd. I'm Jeff's co-host for 2 years now. I used to cover Guardians prospects at Guardians Baseball Insider, and I currently write for the Morning Journal, the News Herald, Next Year in Cleveland, Prospects Live, covering Guardians prospects. Many of these I have seen in person, and it's some bad memories.
I guess I should do the intro. I'm Jeff Ellis, one of the first hosts they brought in. Before this, I was nationally recognized. It's gotten 24/7 on prospects in the draft. So again, right down the middle for me. A lot of these guys
Before we get into this real quick,
hit a fastball down the middle. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, some of them never even had a chance to do it. Before we get into it, Jeff, too, we should shout out two of our new listeners. We've not new, but everydayers and new listeners. We got Team Big V. Shout out to Team Big V. Cardinals fan said he's subscribing now every day because he enjoyed the show. We appreciate that. And then our good friend Moving Averages last week said he listened to us in 3 different time zones. That's some dedication right there. On the road, never missing an episode of Locked On Guardians. We appreciate that over here.
100% we do. So yeah, let's dive into the biggest busts in Cleveland recent draft history. No Steve Dunning on this list. I'm not going to go back to Glenn Tufts. None of that stuff. But before we do, real quick, I do have to say, so I was trying to, because the draft has changed so much over the years, I hand entered a ton of data, and just to give you an idea of like the value of picks. Like I spent a lot of time, because here's the thing, teams will often throw money at late round picks, but the value isn't always there. Like it's not so much how much money you sometimes spend on picks. It sometimes it's just more where they are taken in terms of value. And if you have a top 5 pick, they average 15 WAR per, that's the average return on investment. That's a lot. That's from 2000 to 2010. And it's only going to go up more than likely, because 2010, that's Bryce Harper. That's guy's still playing. Manny Machado was that class. That 15 is going to go up. If you're 6 to 10, that was 10.6 WAR. Again, a very solid player. 11 to 15, 9.8, really solid. Then it falls off. 16 to 20, you're at 4.5 WAR. 20 to 25 is 6.3. 26 to 30 is a 3.0. 31 to 50 is 2.4, 2.5. Second round picks, which is interesting, because a lot of times second round picks, or even later than that, second round picks have an average of about 3 WAR. While first round picks in general have an average of about 6. So for me personally, as I'm going through this, and I know my methodology is very different than Justin's, is I'm using this data of the expected return on investment. And if your expected return on investment means that basically anyone who's taken the top 15 picks is a lot more valuable than anyone taken anywhere else.
Yeah, it's fair. I think we are a little bit different. I definitely did think about that after you presented that information to me. The other thing I really looked at too was money, and obviously where they were picked in the draft, money, and then and obviously overall WAR. So money factored into this to me too, not necessarily where they were drafted. That also impacted for me. But if I looked at some guys who got some money down the board, which clearly in some cases they were saving that for, and just a bad allocation of money, which I think contributes to being a bad pick for a lot of different reasons. So let's go, Jeff. Who do you got on your dishonorable mentions? I'm curious to see if we have anybody
Okay.
that
So you got to mention
for you that I have a top 10.
Yeah, you got to mention Trey Haley, who was still like a top 5 bonus back in 2008. From what I understood, they drafted him not being sure they could sign him. He was a bit of a knucklehead, which will be a theme we'll hear. There were stories that I can't repeat.
That is very true. Yeah.
But Trey Haley was a pretty expensive, pretty high second round pick. And then after that,
1.25 million.
Yeah, which is like 6th or 7th all time. And then if you look at the first round, I have Corey Smith, because Corey Smith was a top 15 pick since 2000. Trying to remember exactly. In 2000, he was 26th overall. I guess it's just because he got 1.3 million. I don't know if he really deserves it. Dan Denham was a top 20 pick, didn't get to the big leagues. And then a pair of knuckleheads, Carson Tucker and Ethan Hankins. Neither of them were top 20 picks, which make them not quite as valuable. And Carson Tucker in particular was a money saver to sign P.D. Halpin. Not that necessarily that's been the best work of it, but 3 of my top 5
trending towards dishonorable mention.
Yeah, I mean 3 of my top 5 are knuckleheads, and they're not in the news, but they're knuckleheads, and that's part of the reason that like Tucker and Hankins are essentially out of baseball, and Haley was, but pretty quickly. I think he might have gone to the Pirates for a very short spell when he left.
Yeah, Haley had some run elsewhere. I mean, technically Hankins is not a baseball; he's an indie ball. Tucker, as far as I know, is not playing anywhere.
Yeah,
he hasn't played anywhere since 2023. He just didn't want to play baseball. I don't know what happened there. So I don't have Tucker on my dishonorable mentions list. Stick around to see if he's on my top 10. I do have Trey Haley on there. Yeah, there was a lot of friction between him. Yeah, a lot of friction between him and the organization. A lot of coaches that was a mess.
Yeah.
Also, Trey is not his first name, so that's an interesting one. I have Dan Denham as well. Dan Denham, just because I'm going back to see why. Because he was a 17th overall pick and got just under $2 million. That's a hard one to ignore. I have Alex Smith in my dishonorable mentions because Alex Smith, and we'll talk about this a little bit throughout the show too, about trade value. He was a 15th overall pick in his draft year. And
do you mean Alex White?
I did Alex White. I don't know why I think Alex Smith. That's hilarious. The longtime NFL quarterback, Alex Smith. Yeah, Alex White. Sorry.
Yeah,
I had Alex White. I just pulled a Jeff. That was good. Alex Smith, Alex White. All right. Google keeps auto-correcting that. That's hilarious. $2.25 million for the 15th overall pick. And yes, we'll talk about trades and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of money for that guy. 15th overall pick. Just very, very bad vibes there. Brad Snyder is on my list because Brad Snyder was the 18th overall pick. We're talking about guys in the top 20. He's not my top 10. He's dishonorable mention, but negative WAR, 1.5 million. 2003 in general was just a horrid year of picks for them. I want to get to that later too, 2003. And then, so I have Denham, White, Snyder, and Haley in mine.
Yeah.
I have Corey Snyder in mind, I have Brad Snyder, not Corey. I'm sorry.
I mean, if we went back, one can make a case for Corey Snyder. He was like a high pick who ended up with a negative WAR, which I know people will be like, he was.
You can't do that.
But it's like, he was not the highest, the best. There was a 1-year peak. He was Kareem Garcia before Kareem Garcia in some regards.
That's a good one, yeah.
But we got to come back from break and actually break down this top 10. We have some definite arguments. Alex White is super high on mine, so you got that to look forward to.
Oh, I've got money. As you're going to see, money is a big factor in mine. less so where they were picked. I definitely weighted money a little bit more heavily for you. All right, we'll break down our top 10 biggest draft busts in Cleveland baseball, I should say history, but the last decade is kind of where we're going with this. So stick around for more of that on today's Locked On Guardians.
Our good friends here at Hims are back, which we always appreciate when someone is back with us on the show today. And here's the thing about Hims. It's there, when you want to make that moment special, make it last. They are doing something special with their product, which is it's a dissolvable, which helps get into your bloodstream, which helps it react quicker. They are changing healthcare by providing you access to affordable treatments from the comfort of your couch. They provide a range of doctor-trusted treatments like chewables and hard mints. And the process is 100% online, so you don't have to go see your doctor and have that uncomfortable talk. You just answer some questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If you get it, it's discreetly shipped to your door for free. No insurance needed. One low price covers everything. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, Hims can help you find the option that works best for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounds, products which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on the product and subscription plan.
All right, Jeff, let's go. Let's hear number 10 for you really quickly.
Okay, so 10 in some regard kind of goes a little bit against what I was saying, but I got Dylan Howard here, who's a second round pick. He was in the 60s. He was a first round grade. I was so excited when they drafted Dylan Howard. It was him and who was that lefty? Danny Norris were the two lefties, the two pitchers that were really high on the board. And there's a lot of great stories about how this is a great kid. He's very mature, and he played one season in the minors in 2012. He never got out of Arizona, has the third highest second round bonus in the history of this franchise. And, added 15 pounds after he was drafted in the offseason, or might have been 20. And then he came back the next year and got suspended for performance enhancing drugs. And then that was it. And he was done. And
I don't think it was just PEDs, by the way. I think there were.
I mean, the suspension at the time was only PEDs. That's what I can say. He was suspended for PEDs was the official statement at the time. You gave him a huge bonus, and he was, supposed to I had him as a top 5 prospect. Was that the Lindor? Was that the 2011 draft too? But I can't remember. It's he was a big component of that draft, and he is 10th because, again, third highest bonus in franchise history. 1 year in the minors, never got to affiliate ball. That's almost unheard of.
Yeah, thank goodness for Francisco Lindor in that draft, because Dylan Howard's 9th on my list, because when you get paid that much money and you don't even get out of rookie ball, and that's just a swing and a miss on character evaluation overall, I would say there. And then, 2012 was Mitch Brown. I was going to say Mitch Brown, but that was 2012. I'm thinking of Jake Sisko. Maybe it was the 2011 draft, or was that also?
That was 12. Sisko.
Was that 12? Okay, so 11 was okay. 12 is where they swung and missed on more.
Devon McClure and Josh McAdams and Shane Casey.
I wrote McClure down. McClure didn't make my list, but I wrote him down.
I thought about him as well. Money. Yeah, they gave him the way. I had Sean Brady. It was 2013. It was a big money late guy. So, but those guys can't quite compete with the high. Your big busts are big money, or more often, like I said, selection.
So Howard was 9 for me. 10 for me was Michael Aubrey. I bet you Aubrey's higher on your list.
Yeah,
guy who got $2 million. Yeah, the reason I have it number 9, or I had number 10 is lower on my list, is because he did actually make the major leagues, and really what caused his downfall was injuries. It was a back issue he never could recover from. So I'm a little less hard on injuries in this case. I mean, obviously I'll contradict myself with later ones, but in this case, I'm a little less hard on the injury. I mean, they did give him 10 or $2 million. He was a top 15 pick. He was 11th overall. That's rough. But he made the majors. Like, if I'm comparing, I don't know. I guess it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? Howard's a lower pick. Aubrey's a way higher pick.
Yeah,
they gave them both a lot of money. To me, Aubrey just made it, and he just had a back injury. Like, I can wait. You can weight those two things a little bit different. So I had Aubrey number 10, and I had.
I'll explain it with why I disagree with you on that one later.
All right, and then 8, I had Alex Leviski. Let's go to 8 real quick. I had Alex Leviski. This is a way down one here. Look, and this is strictly mostly money, right? Because Alex Leviski was the 8th round pick in 2010. He got $1 million. They gave him a lot of money to give up going to Georgia Tech, and he's a local kid. And listen, I liked Alex Leviski a ton. Great kid. There was a chance for him to be a coach. I think they talked about with him because this wasn't working. But I think he played like a handful of games in AAA just because of roster need at that point. But $1 million for an 8th round pick. I just can't justify that with what he did.
The one thing you got to remember in 2012 is that is our last capped year. That is last year they could spend what they wanted, and they were really aggressive, and you give them credit. They gave Michael Goodnight a ton of money in that draft. Levon Washington, Tony Walters. They pay. I mean, they gave Tony Walt. They really. It's the thing. They took advantage of 2010, and it didn't work out. Tyler Holt got a lot of money. They really spent. Kyle Blair. They spent a lot in that class. So I will say, they did not spend to keep Ben Lively. That was the year they drafted him out of high school. But they
their best pick.
Yeah, I give him credit for spending. Leviski was an interesting gamble, and he was definitely higher rated than where he was taken.
Yeah, lots and lots of power, good arm behind the plate, but just contact issues just burned him. He could never make contact. No. So a lot of money for an 8th round pick. So that's why he's 8 for me.
Okay, so my 9,
I liked Alex as the person.
Yeah, so I got to catch up. My 9 is Tyler Naquin. I think that'll surprise some people, but he was a guy where, you look at what they did with him. He was someone they drafted to save money. He was a money-saving pick at 14, so they could spread that money around to get Kieran Lovegrove, to get Devon McClure, to get Mitch Brown, to get Jake Sisko. That was a very intentional strategy. And he was the 15th overall pick. We've talked about the top 15 picks are significantly more valuable than every other pick. And if we're looking since 2000, he essentially was at best a platoon guy. He's going to have, 500 games in his major league career, 3.1 WAR. He's probably still one of the top 10 outfielders that they have drafted since Manny Ramirez. But he still did not give you the return on investment for a top 15 pick. That overall value said the average value is closer to 10 and he's at 3.1. So you just want more. You don't want a guy who at best was a part-time player. And then my 8 was to go back just to catch up with you is Will Benson, who was 14th overall. So that puts him in even kind of that higher tier. And he currently has a negative WAR. He really struggled coming up through the minors. It was a pretty brutal year for him last year. He has a chance to remove himself from this list, but right now you're talking about a guy who got a significant bonus there of $2.5 million, and so far has produced negative production in the big leagues across multiple levels. They have not had. That's the thing. This team has been relatively good in the 2000s. They haven't had a ton of high picks, and when you're looking at picks in that top 15, they're so much more valuable. And you tend to get better production. And here's another guy where they really don't have anything to show for it.
Yeah, I can't argue on the Benson. I mean, Benson didn't make my list because they're just, I guess the way I looked at it was if you made the majors, and I know you're talking about value in terms of the higher picks, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So I can't really argue your methodology on that. I just kind of looked more at my list as guys who I have a mix. I have some guys who made it and just had poor production. And I have some guys who just never made it. And I think that's a huge miss because if you just don't make it, that's a huge miss for me. Even if you produce anything, but you're right. There is an expectation of some value if you do make it and you miss on that. So we're moving on to 7 here and 6 real quickly before we move on. 7 for me is Ethan Hankins. I know you have him on your dishonorable mention list. Again, just poor character evaluation. I love the arm coming out of the draft. You're talking about Dylan Howard earlier. I was really excited about Ethan Hankins. Huge fastball, big body, giant breaking ball. I really thought the world of his talent when they drafted him. I was so excited. First it was conditioning, and then it was just injuries, and then it was character issues.
Yeah.
It all went backwards, just very like, from the minute they drafted him, just all backwards, right?
It was a backslide from the start.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the conditioning, the health, and then the character just all flew out the coop real quick. And then, I'm sorry, 6. I have Bo Mills. I was big on Bo Mills at 6. He was my first ever minor league interview, and looked like Tom Brady. Nice guy at the time when I talked to him. Just, again, 13th overall pick. Didn't work out. Didn't hit.
Yeah, I have 7 as Brady Aiken. He was 17th overall. It was a kind of a poor draft. They took a big gamble. I mean, the year before I was comparing the dude to Kershaw. He was the first overall pick, and they had multiple first-round picks. If you're going to gamble, that's when you gamble. You have 3 first-rounders. It's the time to do it. And I'll say this, too, as someone who wrote about prospects at the time, like, it energized a fan base who had been kind of down on drafts. That was an energizing draft pick for a lot of people. Problem was they got too smart. They did that whole unicorn, taking a big risk. Like, people looked at his x-rays and said, nah, we're good. And Cleveland's like, well, hey, maybe it'll work. And, he's not a top 15 pick. So there is that little more wiggle. And then, but everyone knows the Brady Aiken story at this point. And I have Trevor Crowe, who, from what I recall at the time he was drafted, was not viewed as a top 14 talent. They took him 14th overall in 2005. He was an outfielder. They tried to move him to second base. It didn't work. That's another class where it's like, after him, it wasn't great, but there was like Ellsbury and Garza and Rasmus and Pennington. But the kind of Trevor Crowe got like a decent amount of money. He got more than just about everyone I just mentioned.
Almost 1.7.
Yeah, and how can I put this? He's a University of Arizona baseball player, and by all accounts, he was more focused on people, certain types of people, than the game itself. There were, again, he seemed like, and I hate to say it because I get back someone that get mad, but like the stories that existed like a decade after he was out of AA, those stories still existed in Akron and were passed along because he got to be kind of infamous. So again, it's kind of like someone who baseball wasn't the primary focus. And like I said, that's why it was always when they drafted Kipnis, I'm like, they're going to really try this again after how bad. And I was excited for Trevor Crowe. Like, he was 2005. This was my first year out of college. I was really starting to follow the draft. I'm like, oh, this guy can hit and steal bases, but it was bad.
Yeah. As you've seen so far, a lot of missed character evaluations. And I think that's a big reason why you see Cleveland right now spend so much time. Like, you see, there was a story that came out on Monday about the Cubs, which is interesting because you've got Carter Hawkins as the GM there. They're talking about cutting traditional scouting. Like, they're relying more on video, whereas Cleveland, they do rely on their model, but they've got a lot of scouts.
But they did also cut a ton of scouts recently in the past few years.
They did.
Yeah.
But the thing they do really well is they at least they focused on more recently is character evaluation. They spent a lot of time, and I think you're seeing.
Yeah.
And look, it's never gonna be perfect. You're never gonna get everybody right, but I would tend, just from talking to these guys the last several years, I would say they've gone in a much better direction in terms of character evaluation. You're always gonna have some slip. Yeah, it's definitely gonna focus.
And I think the other thing too, like, we're gonna go, before we go to break and before we go top 5 here. This is what I have to say is, I've been doing this for a long time. You have as well. We get to be connected. People love to share stories. Like, we've heard these stories about this guy and this guy. Notice how we don't say things about Naquin. We don't say things about Benson. We don't say things, about a lot a these players, because
Will Benson is a
he's 80 grade person. Like, by all accounts, work ethic, everything. But people love to share stories. So if someone's focus isn't on baseball, or someone has done something, like Lucas Ursig, I've talked about this many times. I heard horror stories about him in high school and college. And then I find out like he's had a terrible life. Like, and that dude has overcome so much. So guys can overcome from a bad background, but you don't always necessarily need scouts. You just have to have your ears open, because people love to talk, and you will find out these stories about what players you want to avoid. And in the past, Cleveland, kind of like they do with injuries, like with Aiken, they were willing to take gambles on character. Like, the focus on talent. I think they've learned that is not an area you can afford to gamble on.
No, not when you're, and that's definitely not what they did at number 1 this year. That's for sure. All right, let's get into the top 5 here on the other side. Speaking of top 5, man, I'm going to be making some bets on the Cavs. First, ready to tackle the NFL action this season with America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, so much more on the same page where you place your bets. If you think Jameis Winston's going to throw another interception, go and I don't know if you can bet on that, but that's a hunch I would have in the middle of the game. I don't even watch the Browns. I would truthfully turn my attention to the Cavs, which plus 800 right now on Eastern Conference winning. Celtics, Knicks, and 76 are still ahead of them. The Cavs are perfect right now. They're looking great, like a well-oiled machine. And then if you turn your attention over to the NBA Finals, also not put really high on this list, plus 2,200. That's some easy money right there. And again, these are long-term bets, but I don't know. I'm turning my attention to the Cavs in terms of what I would put my money on FanDuel. But all you got to do is put $5 down and win if you're a new customer and get $150 in bonus bets from FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more at FanDuel, official sports book partner of the NFL. I am very excited for this juicy top 5 because we've already had quite a few disagreements. I will go real quickly here. So I said I had Bo Mills. It's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Yeah. I have Carson Tucker next on my list. And this is a little unfair because I'll say this. It's a bad draft year. But I think this is a mischaracter evaluation. And maybe they didn't know this at the time. Maybe this came out later. I don't know. But this doesn't seem like a guy who wanted to play baseball to me either. And maybe there's some other stuff going on. But Carson Tucker gets $2 million. You're saving him money on him to go pick other guys. And honestly, the 2020 draft is going to be a bottom 5. You know what? I don't want to burn anybody for 2020 because 2020 was a terrible year in general. But yeah, it's not great. So Carson Tucker for me. And then the next one on my list here.
Since it's top 5, why don't we just go back and forth at 5?
All right. Okay.
Right. So for me, 5 is Alex White, who you previously mentioned. And he was a big money guy who played well in the minors. He had been a big name when he went to UNC too. Like he was a guy who kind of disappointed a little bit in college previous to getting there. Like UNC was kind of like a hotbed at the time. And, you know, they gave him a lot of money. He was a big pitcher. That was the year. You know, that's of course the Mike Trout draft, who was the 4th rated player on my board at that point. White was ahead of him, but White just, I remember working for IBI and getting a message from his agent, like where they were like, why don't people talk about him more? And we kind of saw why, but like, again, 14th overall, high pick. I know they flipped him when they realized he wasn't good. It was kind of funny if you were around at that time because it became very clear that they were trying to move him in multiple. His name came up in so many trades. I was like, I don't think they're high on this kid.
Yeah, I was super excited with the talent of Alex White when they drafted him, but yeah, it never really materialized for him. I got Jeremy Sowers next on my list, and I had him higher initially, and I dropped him a little bit just because he actually made it. But when you go back and you look at Jeremy Sowers in terms of where he was drafted, you're talking about the 6th overall pick in the draft. 2.4 million. Maybe I should have had him a little bit higher. But I have guys above him that just didn't even make it. So I guess 6th overall pick and all that money, I guess I probably should have put him a little bit higher. But they're just 2 guys on my list that I saw and I just didn't like what they did. And some of it's also revisionist history too. But I like Sowers. I was a big fan. I told people I was in high school when he got drafted, so I didn't know anything. I know less than I know now. I was like, oh, it's the next Tom Glavine, and he's the next Cy Young winner. And
Peter Gammons tweeted the same thing when he was called up.
Yeah, I probably got the information from Peter Gammons because he was a savant back then. I was so excited for Jeremy Sowers, and that first year he was 7-4, and I forgot what his ERA was.
Like,
I was like,
under 2 ERA, or no, yeah, in the minors it was under 2. But yeah, he was great.
And it was just all a mirage. It was no fastball, and
that's why you needed FIP back then. You know, that's like you go and you look at his FIP.
No, we just didn't know. Yeah, it was pretty bad. So I had Sowers next.
I'll save my info on Sowers for when he comes up. I have Bo Mills next. Bo Mills they took a first base only prospect with the 13th overall pick, which is just that's bad to begin with. He was a JUCO guy, and there was really good talent on the board, and that was the first ever draft on TV. And I remember being like, I was following it with Callis and Sickles, and I didn't even know who Bo Mills was. I was like, they drafted who? And yeah, it was a weird list. Like I don't even think it's very weird for a guy that high to not even sniff a top 100 when he was drafted. He was like viewed as closer to the end of the first round, and they took him way too high. They were really into bloodlines at the time, and I think that's what trapped him there.
And they're still into that to some respects, but we also have theories on that too. But yeah, that was one of them. So next for me is Brady Aiken. I weighted Brady Aiken high. I know you said earlier you understood the gamble on that, and I do understand the gamble on that too. And it wasn't a great draft. Even though I understood the gamble, I didn't really like it. I did not like the gamble. A lot of money, and just I don't. And you know better than I do as far as who was available, who wasn't available on the board at that time. So I don't necessarily have a lot of that.
Walker Buehler was the guy I mocked to them on the day of the draft.
No, just a two-time World Series champion, no big deal. Close out the last World Series. So I just didn't like the gamble on a guy who already had elbow issues as it was, and
he had a thin ligament. A thin ligament was the concern for him.
Yeah, I thought it was terrible. And look, I talked to Brady a couple times when he was in Lake County. This is another kid who I think he was a good kid. I think he did everything he could to try to overcome these issues, and I don't think the work ethic was ever an issue with him. I think he got the yips. I think he started hating baseball because of the pressure and he wasn't doing well. So it wears on you. So I felt bad for the kid when it all kind of unraveled for him. But hey, he still put $2 million in the bank and pitched a couple of years in pro ball. And I hope he's doing well because he was always nice. He always answered questions. He struggled a lot in Lake County.
He never ran away from it. Yeah.
He was like, no, I'm not talking. Like he never was like, no, I won't talk after.
My number one guy is someone who would not talk. That's maybe a story for a different day, but I'll say that.
What do you got next?
But my number 3 is Michael Aubrey, and this is because he was 11th overall. In that draft, it is health, but it's like this is when they were really snake bitten, and this will be fun for. I'll shout out tomorrow's show is going to be What If Wednesday on injuries. What if certain players hadn't been injured and how it changes? Like Michael Aubrey, they might win a World Series if Michael Aubrey doesn't get snake bitten by injuries. If you look at the timeline and when he could have been up and helping this team. But again, it's value. It's right. It's the 11th overall pick is incredibly valuable. It's just outside the top 10. They paid him a decent amount of money. He was a very well thought of player out of Tulane, best hit tool in the class, just like Tyler Naquin, just like Bradley Zimmer. So they loved that quote unquote best hit tool, but he actually looked to have it before his health issues. And then, it's position. And yeah, he did finally make it, but you're expecting, like I said, the return on investment for that one is like, expecting 10.6, and I believe he had a negative WAR when it was all said and done. So, yeah, that's not exactly ideal.
No, I was excited about Michael Aubrey, the hitter, for sure. I remember all the stories about him. I thought he was going to be people thought he was going to be a batting champion. Like if people really were high on that ability to hit, and I was really excited. My number 1 guy is.
Wait, aren't we at 2? Did you do 2 and 1?
Aiken was 2 for me.
Oh, okay. So I'm behind. So my number
3.
Okay, so my number 2 then, since I'm behind very quickly, is Jeremy Sowers. Fun story about Jeremy Sowers. The Cincinnati Reds drafted him out of high school because they didn't want a first-round pick and knew that he was an impossible side going to Vanderbilt. Just like the San Francisco Giants signed Michael Tucker and then traded him to lose a first-round pick and this is why we started in 2000, because in the 90s, things got weird. Sowers was the 6th overall pick. And that is an incredibly, this team has not had a lot of picks that high. Like for as terrible as they've been, since the terrible 70s and even in the 80s, it's like, there's just not been a lot of high picks. And Jeremy Sowers has some of the lowest game totals of any high pick. I mean, the only ones who played less games in the majors are Glenn Tufts, who never made it, and Travis Bazana, who's obviously the number 1 bust because he's provided the least amount of value so far. I'm kidding. But like, guys drafted 6 or higher, Michael Weaver in 68, Glenn Tufts in 73, and then it's Jeremy Sowers for impact. So it's like, again, it's the relative position, and he just didn't do anything. He had a great half a year, and then he was done forever and became some of the lowest amount of production they've gotten from a top 10 pick, where you're expecting a guy to be, again, that is you can sit there, even if it's not Nace, somewhere between 11 to 16 WAR. And
career, right? Yeah, that's pretty rough for that pick. So yeah, cat's out of the bag on mine. I went Clint Frasier number 1, and I was kind of reluctant on this one, and I could say you sort of changed my mind, but not really, because when I went back and looked, 2 teams swung and missed on Clint Frasier. Cleveland clearly got it wrong, and some of this is revisionist history too. I'll say the morning that we found out that Clint Frasier was going to the Yankees for Andrew Miller as a centerpiece, I wasn't happy, and I knew what Miller could do for them. I knew it was a big move, but I definitely for sure thought that Clint Frasier was going to go on to be a multi-time All-Star for the Yankees. Like, the bat speed was unteachable. It was so good. There was athleticism. He was just really strong. I was like, this is going to be a guy who's going to be a guy who can hit for average. I didn't think he was a chaser, and I thought he had power, good arm in the outfield. I really thought we were talking about maybe a guy who wasn't going to hit for the highest average, wasn't going to play center field, but we're talking like a 25 home run hitting right fielder with a good arm. And I thought a guy who could also take a walk. So I thought there was a lot of talent there. So Cleveland did a good job of moving him. And that's why I was originally reluctant to put him at number 1, because I was like, look, they turned him into a great asset in the trade. But then I was like, well, didn't do great for them. And then the Yankees got him, and he was even worse for the Yankees somehow, and I'll say this, some of it is, he had a concussion. He ended up with vertigo, and
I don't think that
some of that's just
him enough. Like, I mean, by the time that stuff came up, he was already a bust.
I think people tend to overlook concussions and how big they are. No, like Carson Tucker for a long time here suffered from that as a catcher.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had half a dozen concussions myself. I know how, but so Clint Frasier couldn't pick up secondary pitches and became very passive. He started to walk because he became passive. And nowadays I recognize that. At the time, I thought he was evolving as a hitter. You learn, you change. I mean, you can find probably Internet Archive, some of the hyperbolic stuff I wrote it. I was all over Clint Frasier. I mocked him to Cleveland from the beginning. I thought he was an ideal fit. Even though he was 19, like, he was an older player. He was undersized. He struggled with off-speed pitches. He definitely believed his own hype, 110%. And he's the player who, again, would complain about talking to media in Double-A. Like, I only interviewed him once because it was was very hard. He would never want to talk to anyone. The only player I ever ran into was him. So when he got traded to New York, I'm like, that's going to be fun for him. But he was a little bit cantankerous, and there were just points where it felt like he bought in a little too much into the Clint Frasier hype train, that, he was the big red tomato tornado. I can't remember what it was now, but yeah, it just, when you have that high of a pick, and if you go and you look at this team, it's like the only players higher taken than him is Travis Bazzana, Paul Shuey, Mark Lewis, who, if we went further, would have probably made this list. Greg Swindell, Rick Manning, Steve Dunning, who never pitched in the minors, might have made this list. Corey Schneider, Tom Brennan, Clint Frasier. And all of those guys, only Mark Lewis has less value than him right now. But Mark Lewis also has more games. So he's when you have a pick that high, Clint Frasier becomes the biggest bust of the last 25 years.
We ran the different versions of Clint Frasier, and I saw the version of Clint Frasier Double-A that you did. But when he was in Lake County, he was much easier to talk to. Definitely kind of felt like he was very borderline cocky, but he was much easier to talk to, much more willing to talk in high and low A. So something changed along the way, and maybe that was buying into the hype. It's unfortunate.
I will say, I talked to people who talked to him and talked about how different he and Austin Meadows were. Where Austin Meadows was kind of the very humble type, and Clint Frasier always had that cockiness. I think he had a stumble in Lake County, worked to correct, and then went full back into that kind of, like what people have talked about at points with Baker Mayfield, like the whole needing to get knocked down to get back up. It's like that seemed to be a case here. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. All right. On Wednesday's show, we will talk about What If again. What If Wednesday. We'll talk about what if the biggest injuries in what ifs in Cleveland baseball history. So we got everything from Addie Joss to Grady Sizemore, Herb Score, John Smiley doesn't really count on this list, but we got a lot of
Adam Miller, Michael Aubrey. You got to discuss a little bit. Daniel Espino even.
Yeah, we could probably throw Daniel Espino. So check that out on Wednesday, and also we'll have a quick bonus episode just kind of talking about the David Fry situation and some of the new information on that and what that means for the Guardians offseason in 2025. So you got Top 10 Tuesday, you got a little bit of a bonus from Tuesday, and you got What If Wednesday. A lot of Guardians content going on right now. And again, we know you're not getting it anywhere else, so stick with us. We're here every day. We got new stuff coming every day.
Yep. Thank you for joining us. Remember to rate and review, download. It helps. Thank you to all the new people in the comments. Appreciate you all jumping in and commenting. Thank you to everyone who is jumping in and sticking with us throughout this off season. And as we always say, go Guardians, go.